Coming up at New Day at Arirang, South Korea is expected to see around 2,000 new infections Monday, inching down due to the weekend effect. Meanwhile, concerns mount as the country continues to see a rising number of critically ill patients. Nearly 200 countries from around the world have reached an agreement to fight global warming. The Glasgow climate pact vows to slash the industrial use of fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. And South Korea's vice foreign minister, who is in the U.S., says Seoul and Washington agree on pushing ahead with Seoul's proposal to declare a formal end to the Korean War. He hinted good news is expected as we get closer to the end of the year.
Hello and welcome to this Monday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on November 15th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I'm Mark Bream.
And I'm Kim Mo-gan. Over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
That's right. And we are going to begin with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea and around the world.
The number of critical cases are increasing in South Korea, which may prompt health authorities to halt the Living with COVID-19 plan. Authorities in Europe are also seeing a surge in infections, which have seen them go back into lockdown.
Yeah, so for the latest updates, we have our reporter Kim Yeon-sung in the studio for us for the entirety of this week. Good morning, Yeon-sung.
Feels great to be back.
Well, it's good to have you back. Let's start with the COVID-19 situation in South Korea then. What's the latest?
Well, let's start with the numbers. Health authorities have logged up to almost 1,900 new cases until 9 p.m. on Sunday night. And they're expecting Monday's morning official tally to be a couple of hundred higher than that figure. So cases are expected to be above 2,000 on Monday, as it has been for almost every single day for the past week. Ever since South Korea started its Living with COVID-19 policy, the nation has been seeing an uptick in cases nationwide, with more than 2,000 cases on most days during November. And this hike was fully expected, but the question remains whether the country can handle it. So for 9 days straight, South Korea has been reporting over 400 severe cases, with the country reporting another 483 serious cases on Sunday. Keep in mind, health authorities said earlier that they might start winding back their Living with COVID-19 plans if the country was seeing 500 or more critical cases daily. And the current trend shows that the country is not far from reaching that mark. Seoul and Incheon both have 75% of their ICU beds filled. Health authorities on Tuesday will announce an emergency plan that entails the specific guidelines of when to pull the brakes on living with COVID-19. An expert says we still need to keep an eye out and wait a bit longer to fully determine the magnitude of the situation. Take a listen. Excuse me, there was a problem with the soundbite. So if I'm repeating what he was saying, he said that it's increasing and it's still clear that we've surpassed on our limit on how much we can handle. It's not clear as if we surpassed our limit, and we still need to monitor for at least a week.
All right, Yeon-sung, thank you for that explanation. If I'm not mistaken, we have the national college entrance exam coming up this week, right? So what measures have health authorities taken to prevent outbreaks on this grand test?
Right. Well, as much as the students are concerned with acing the test, health authorities are concerned with keeping these kids safe while they're taking the exam. Since last week, almost all high school students have turned to online classes to prevent any school-wide outbreaks. And for Wednesday, which is a day before the national exam, health centers that conduct PCR tests will stay open until 10 p.m. So students have more room to get tested for COVID-19 and to react should there be an emergency situation. Those who test positive will still be granted a fair chance to take the test, and they will take the test in a safe and isolated space under the health authorities' supervision. They're also stepping up vaccinations among high school students, with almost 200,000 high schoolers aged 16 to 17 having already received their jabs.
Well, it really is a case that, this is the most stressful and most important day of young students' lives, but now they've got this COVID-19 situation in the back of their minds as well, so it's making it even harder for them. But let's move away from the situation here in Korea. It's getting worse in Europe. They're seeing a fresh resurgence in cases there. Some countries are handling it very different from others. Some might say what some are doing is rather heavy-handed and the population isn't really liking it. Tell us more about what's going on in Europe right now.
Well, some countries are resorting to quite drastic measures within their country to curb the spread of COVID-19. For example, Austria has declared a lockdown for all vaccinated citizens over the age of 12. So this means that all unvaccinated citizens over the age of 12 are not allowed to leave their homes unless they're out for working, grocery shopping, or going for a walk. And anyone who violates this rule will actually be fined up to $1,600 US. Austria has less than a fifth of South Korea's population, and they've reported more than 10,000 cases. So it is understandable why health authorities found this recent surge so concerning. But as you can imagine, this move is sparking a massive backlash and protests across the nation. Netherlands has also retracted its living with COVID-19 policy and went back into lockdowns for the first time in 2 months. They're closing down eateries, cafes, supermarkets at 8 p.m. sharp and all non-essential establishments by 6 p.m. as they saw 16,000 cases in a country of 17 million.
All right, Yunsing, thank you for the report. Welcome back to our show. So we'll talk to you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. COVID-19 oral antivirals are starting to hit markets around the world after winning approval from health authorities. Experts say these pills are vital in many ways, not least because they have the potential to help already really overburdened healthcare systems reduce the strain of a potential influx of COVID-19 patients as the winter closes in, as we just heard is happening in Europe right now. That being said, experts also say that these drugs are not any kind of panacea and vaccinations are still the best option to try and stem the spread.
Yes, and for more, we connect to Catherine Cilli-Radke, professor of chemistry and biochemistry at University of Maryland, and also serves as president-elect of the International Society for Antiviral Research. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Now, firstly, how important is the introduction of these antiviral pills in the fight against the pandemic?
Extremely important, because vaccines are obviously important too. They protect us from getting the virus, but they can't kill and they can't treat the virus. And so it's really important that we have both to fight the coronavirus. In addition, a lot of people can't get the vaccine. Maybe they're allergic to the components, or they can't mount a good immune response. And so it's really important to have the drugs available to treat them. And we also have to think about people in rural areas and underdeveloped nations where they just don't have the healthcare system and hospitals that we do, and that some of the rest of the world does. And so that's what makes it important to have the drugs available, because they can easily be transported and given at home prior to people who would have to be hospitalized. 80% of the people can be treated at home if it's caught early.
Right, because that's one of the big issues. The supply is going to be limited at the outset, and there are these questions swirling around about who should be the top priority when it comes to receiving them. There are also concerns that developed countries are going to essentially vacuum up the entire supply at the expense of poorer countries. Some also express worry that these drugs will encourage the virus to mutate even further. Some have made that argument for the vaccines as well. But do you share these concerns regarding the pills? And what else should be considered before these pills start hitting markets around the world?
Well, I can't really speak to the idea of nations grabbing things up. We have to work together. Until we kill this all over the world, it's going to continue to replicate and infect people. But your latter point about it causing mutations is actually the opposite. We use combination drugs or drug cocktails to successfully treat viruses for many years. For example, we use 2-drug, 3-drug, and 4-drug combinations to keep HIV at undetectable levels for a patient's entire life. we use combination drugs to, cure hepatitis C, HCV, and you can exponentially decrease your chances of developing resistance if you use these combination drugs. They have a number of benefits besides cutting down the resistance, but that's probably the most important thing.
And Professor, well, as of now, we know that we have two antiviral drugs, molnupiravir made by Merck and the Paxlovid developed by Pfizer. When it comes to how they fight the virus, what are the main differences between the two?
Well, they stop the virus replication at different steps. And so molnupiravir stops the virus from replicating by sort of inducing numerous errors in the RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. And that causes the wrong nucleotide to be incorporated, and that in turn keeps happening and happening and happening until the virus just can't function anymore. And then the Paxlovid actually works by inhibiting the protease. And the protease is an enzyme that's important in the virus's replication pathway for sort of cutting the bigger piece into smaller pieces, which then go on to be the new virus particles. And so they really work by different mechanisms, but complementary mechanisms.
And finally, the EU's medical watchdog has approved Regkirona. This is an antiviral made by the South Korean firm Celtaleon. Rather than being taken orally, though, we must stress that this is administered intravenously. Some researchers in South Korea, they say this particular drug is better than molnupiravir because it's cheaper and more effective. What do you know about this South Korean firm's treatment, and do you share similar concerns about the potential safety and cost of molnupiravir?
Well, I don't know what the cost of the Regkirona monoclonal antibody is, but I did have followed this, and it seems to work very well. It's really reducing the risk for high risk patients by quite a bit. I believe it was 72%. And where molnupiravir was only about 50%. Now, obviously, you still have the issue of having to go to the hospital to be treated. And because, of course, it has to be given by infusion or by IV, just like remdesivir did. But there are concerns about molnupiravir because of the fact that the mechanism by which it works, lethal mutagenesis, can also affect our own polymerases. And there have been some studies out that have shown that this may be possible. And so that would be detrimental to us and could potentially cause toxicity. However, I think we sort of need all of these to go forward and to treat this virus.
All right. Thank you, Professor. It was interesting getting your thoughts, and we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Now, moving on to our next story. Nearly 200 countries from around the world have reached an agreement to try and fight global warming.
The so-called Glasgow Climate Pact includes a plan to slash the industrial use of fossil fuels like coal and natural gas. Choi Won-jung with the details.
The world has taken a significant step in the fight against climate change. Delegations from around the world put their heads together at the COP26 summit in Glasgow, aiming to reduce greenhouse gas producing fossil fuels. After intense negotiation lasting more than 2 weeks, the so-called Glasgow Climate Pact was agreed on Saturday.
At the start of this summit, the world was asking, quite rightly, do the parties assembled here in Glasgow have the courage to rise to the scale of the challenge? Well, my friends, you have responded. We have responded. History has been made here in Glasgow.
The first ever climate deal designed to reduce the use of coal and other fossil fuels includes a plan to double funds for developing nations to adapt to effects of climate change by 2025.
We're welcoming the additional funding for adaptation. However, we need to see it considering that earlier commitments, financial commitments, didn't come to fruition. So with us in the developing world, there's a little bit of lack of confidence.
There was also last-minute intervention before the final resolution.
I see India wishes to take the floor. India, you have the floor.
Now, I propose call upon parties to accelerate the development, deployment, and dissemination of technologies, including accelerating effort to phase down unabated coal power and phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies.
This resulted in a decision to change the wording of the deal from phase out coal use to phase down. The controversial change was accepted by all attendees. The talks ended with agreement to at least limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and come back to negotiating table next year to set up tougher plans. Meanwhile, following the close of a two-week meeting, the UN Secretary General said the deal was an important step, but it was not enough, and urged the world to keep alive the goal of limiting global temperature rise. 최원정, Arirang News.
South Korea's vice foreign minister is expecting a positive outcome in regards to President Moon Jae-in's recent proposal to formally declare an end to the 1950-53 Korean War. He made the remarks Sunday as he departed for Washington for talks with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts. Ji-young reports.
South Korea's vice foreign minister says good news is expected regarding the declaration of a formal end to the Korean War. First Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-gun told reporters at Washington Dulles International Airport on Sunday that the most important factor is that South Korea and the U.S. reach an agreement in terms of the means of ending the war. Choi said the two countries agree on pushing ahead with Seoul's proposal to declare formally ending the war, but are discussing how and when it could be done. He also said that results are expected soon, after which the proposal will be shared with North Korea. Choi added that another important factor to consider is the North's reaction to the agreement and then how to move forward with the regime from there. In an answer to the question over the possibility of a positive response from Pyongyang, he said that it cannot be guaranteed. The vice minister departed for Washington on Sunday for talks with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts. There he'll hold a three-way meeting with the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and Japan's Vice Foreign Minister Mori Takeo on Tuesday local time. This is the first vice ministerial meeting involving the three countries in 4 months. They previously met in Japan in July. Expected issues on the agenda include the proposed declaration of an official end to the 1950 to 1953 Korean War and tackling global supply chain crisis. Ji-young, Arirang News.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Chinese counterpart held full talks Sunday to discuss preparations for this week's virtual summit between Presidents Biden and Xi. While they acknowledged the importance of the upcoming summit, they also exchanged some harsh words regarding Taiwan. Kim Hyo-sun with more.
Ahead of the highly anticipated virtual summit between the leaders of the U.S. and China, the top diplomats of the two countries have spoke over the phone. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken used the opportunity to express concern over Beijing's continued military, diplomatic, and economic pressure against Taiwan. According to the State Department, Blinken also emphasized a long-standing U.S. interest in peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. He also urged China to take part in meaningful dialogue to resolve issues in a peaceful manner. In response, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi called on Washington to clearly and resolutely oppose any moves in Taiwan for independence. Such sharp remarks come as relations between Beijing and Taipei are at their lowest points in decades, with strong rhetoric and increased military posturing. On the upcoming Biden-Xi summit, Wang stressed its great significance not only for U.S. China relations, but also for international relations. Blinken also stressed the meeting presents an opportunity for the superpowers to discuss how to manage competition between the two countries while ensuring close coordination and cooperation in areas where their interests align. The summit between Presidents Biden and Xi, slated to be held on Monday evening Washington time and Tuesday morning in Beijing, is the first between the leaders since President Biden entered the White House in January. Kim Yeo-san, Arirang News.
Now we cross over to our Ocean for global insight and an in-depth look at important development in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Mark, and good morning to you. Well, the leaders of the United States and China, they're going to meet on Monday at a virtual summit amid the intensifying rivalry between the two superpower countries. And tensions are high over trade, Taiwan, military capabilities and human rights. But expectations of a breakthrough between the two leaders are quite low. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki suggests that there wouldn't be any major outcomes and that Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping will discuss how to manage the country's competition and cooperate in areas of common interest. Nevertheless, anticipation for Monday's virtual meeting is very high, and today on Global Insight we discuss what the leaders might talk about in their first summit. For this, we're joined by Nathan Mabubi, research scholar at the Center for the Study of Contemporary China at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also a lecturer in law at Penn Law School. We also have joining us Brendan O'Connor, Associate Professor in American Politics at the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney. So, well, a very warm welcome to you both on a Monday morning, Sunday evening to you in the US. And, well, let's start with you, Dr. Mabubi. Now, ahead of Biden and Xi's summit on Monday, the United States and China, they unexpectedly agreed to cooperate on tackling climate change in a breakthrough deal at COP26, which included cutting methane and illegal deforestation. But do you think the two superpowers are going to be able to branch out their cooperation to more sensitive areas? I mean, there does seem to be more areas of disagreement than ones for potential cooperation at the moment.
Well, I think everyone would agree that the announcement of the joint statement at the COP26 meeting was surprising. We weren't expecting it, and it came as, I think, welcome news to those who were hoping to see the U.S. and China be able to act somewhat collaboratively on this most critical global issue. Of course, it's better to have that as the immediate predicate to the Monday night summit between Presidents Biden and Xi than not to have it. And the question, of course, is then, does it set a tone for a more cooperative discussion? That's probably too much to ask, but certainly better to have that as a predicate than not to have it. And it does seem that even though there are many issues of great concern in the relationship and many issues that the two sides see quite differently, there is at least some runway here for a minimally productive meeting and potentially even some clear outcomes in the same vein as the joint statement on climate.
And now, Dr. O'Connor, to bring you into the conversation. Well, the phone call between the U.S. Secretary of State and China's Foreign Minister on Friday, they appear to confirm the strong differences between the two sides on a range of major geopolitical issues like trade, human rights, military build-up in the Indo-Pacific, and Taiwan, of course, as well as cybersecurity. And all of them are admittedly very pressing issues. But which do you think are going to be prioritised at this meeting?
Probably the issue of Taiwan. I mean, China will want the issue of trade to be at the fore. I mean, China wants some changes to some of the tariffs and restrictions that Donald Trump had brought in. So that's their point of wanting some kind of leverage. And I think the United States will want to focus on Taiwan, reducing the amount of Chinese sort of Air Force activity. And the Chinese will probably want a reduction in American naval activity around Taiwan. So there could be in some ways a compromise on that issue, that both sides pull back from having their military near Taiwan. And the trade issue, there is some push from the American sort of Chamber of Commerce, some of the business elements, to want a more stable and predictable trade environment. So that is definitely a carrot that I think the Biden administration can use. China, all economies coming out of COVID have some vulnerabilities, and I think the Chinese want to see some progress on trade, getting involved in the new version of the TPP in the Asia Pacific. So, you know, it's a good thing they're talking. Maybe not, it's mainly only a first step. As the previous panelist said, the climate announcement is important, a big deal, and hopefully, again, a step towards more substantial action. So, you know, low expectations, but at least conversations are occurring rather than talk of a new Cold War and the build-up of tensions that we saw in the early Reagan administration, where there was very little talking between the Soviet Union and the Reagan administration. Once talking begins, surprising things can happen. It doesn't always lead in a positive direction, but at least it's a start.
Well, it's quite clear that's one of the biggest sticking points is Taiwan. And Dr. Mabubi, we've seen both military and diplomatic tensions escalating to dangerous levels across the Taiwan Strait in recent weeks. And, well, it seems clear that none of the leaders are going to budge on the issue of Taiwan's sovereignty and other issues surrounding the island. And China has also shown its intention to coerce Taipei into unification talks by 2027, according to Pentagon report. How do you think President Biden is going to address this in his summit?
Well, I definitely agree that it's going to be a major topic of discussion at the meeting, just as it was at the meeting between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the sidelines of the G20 meeting. That said, I think both sides have an interest in stability. Neither side wants to see something go over the rails. And so we are seeing both sides make their points about the situation clear. Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, has been referencing the Taiwan Relations Act every time he talks about the One China policy. On the Chinese side, both in words and in actions, they are making their position clear. But this would be devastating for both countries and for the world for there to be some kind of actual conflict over Taiwan in the near future. And I think everyone is clear about that. So while I do think this will be a topic of discussion, I don't think I'm too concerned about going over the guardrails. And I think that there will be other topics that are also addressed in the meeting, whether it be trade, maybe nuclear, maybe public health, maybe climate, that will go beyond simply the Taiwan issue.
And Dr. O'Connor, military tension has been building in the Indo-Pacific region where we are. And, well, with China, of course, flying an unprecedented number of fighter jets above Taiwanese airspace and reports of its fast-evolving nuclear capabilities. And, well, the country's been quite nervous itself about the formation of the AUKUS pact and the role of Quad in the region. How do you think the two leaders are going to address these kind of tensions?
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, AUKUS sends a signal to China that the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia are playing a minor sort of deputy sheriff role coming along as well. It does send, I think, a fairly overt message to China that it is the focus of those three Anglosphere nations. I think it probably overstates where Australia should be. I mean, Australia should be sort of looking to sort of have a much more, I think, productive diplomatic relationship with China, rather than this probably overemphasis in our recent foreign policy on military affairs. So I think if we can move the discussions to diplomacy, to economic issues, there is environmental issues, there's more grounds for cooperation. If it's sort of logjammed and stuck on military issues and territorial issues, then I don't see this as being a very productive meeting. And that's where a lot of the discussion has been in most of this year, on the territorial and military. And so how you create some goodwill and a sort of common cause, maybe on the environmental issue, because it's such an obviously global and pressing issue, and then maybe seek to deal with the territorial issues later, just as in some ways human rights is being put sort of somewhat to the side of the agenda because there's not really much common ground on that issue clearly at the moment.
There certainly has been a great amount of attention on the military side of things here in the Indo-Pacific. And Dr. Mabubi, a recent Pentagon report revealed that China is building up its nuclear capabilities at very alarming speed. And the country hasn't responded to Washington's previous calls for it to join arms control talks with Moscow. Do you think this is going to be addressed at the summit?
By all indications, it will probably be raised by President Biden. It's not clear to me that there will be much of a productive dialogue on it because as far as we can tell so far, the Chinese are not particularly interested in discussing nuclear nonproliferation outside of the context of the United Nations. Yes, absolutely, the Pentagon's report made a big impression within the policy community here, as did the hypersonic missile test not long before that. So absolutely, it's something that President Biden will go into the meeting hoping to discuss. And of course, he will raise the U.S. position on these questions, but it's not one of the areas where I would expect a particularly fruitful dialogue with President Xi and Chinese counterparts at this meeting.
And Dr. Mabubi, well, summits and international cooperation, it's all about give and take, and it seems like the two leaders don't have much to give away. But, well, China's sixth plenum meeting, the plenum assembly, it recently sealed President Xi's status as a so-called forever president. Do you think this is going to make him more unyielding in the international community? How do you think he intends to compete with the United States in the long run?
Well, let me first just say that I do think that there are some issues that there's runway for both countries going to this meeting, and in particular, trade issues, and also potentially the response to COVID-19. On trade issues, the U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai has said on multiple occasions recently that she's having productive dialogues with her counterparts, and it makes sense because, as was said earlier, both economies are coming out of this difficult period. There are economic strains visible in both countries, and both presidents in different ways have to respond to these pressures. Yes, President Xi Jinping has just come out of the sixth plenum meeting, which of course everyone knows has solidified even further his position. President Biden, people say that he's had some political bumps recently, but he also has just had a big political victory in this infrastructure bill. And I think both of them can go in with some degree of strength, but also an ongoing interest in economic development, in maintaining some economic stability. Neither side wants to see the economic issues that are palpable in both countries become bigger issues, whether it be inflation in the U.S. or various things that are going on in China. And so I do think there will be runway for there to be a very productive discussion on trade issues and potentially some deliverables in terms of ongoing meetings that come out of this summit.
And Dr. O'Connor, well, do you think President Xi is going to invite Joe Biden to the 2022 Olympics in Beijing?
Yes, that seems possible. I mean, that I think would be the hope for China, to see a number of world leaders there. This is a showcase event for China, so they certainly do not want any boycott by leaders. I mean, I think one of the other points about the summit is to get on the sort of path of deputies meetings, make sure that there's engagement and discussions between U.S. military leaders and Chinese military leaders. So these summits, we obviously focus on the two presidents, but if you can get a lot of the other background meetings going, in some ways it opens up dialogue, it probably reduces tensions. As we saw at the end of the Trump administration, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff being able to talk with his Chinese counterpart and reassure them about events going on in America that were extraordinary was useful. So I think that that's part of the process here, is setting up lower level meetings and signaling that, in some ways you can turn the relationship into a more bureaucratic relationship rather than one of sort of symbolic sort of rhetoric.
Yes, well, former President Trump did say he was best friends with Xi Jinping, and well, perhaps we won't see that kind of relationship. But Dr. Mabubi, how do you think this personal engagement between the two leaders will turn out? Do you think it will help diffuse some of the tension?
Well, one thing that's very useful is that some of the performance that both sides felt they needed to do has been done. Most famously in that very contentious meeting in Alaska back in March. Also, to some extent, with Wendy Sherman's visit to China, and then John Kerry's visit to China. So some of the atmospherics that maybe both sides felt they needed to perform for their own domestic audiences has been taken care of. And now we go into this meeting where there's no need for that. And I think neither president at the top of the hierarchy would be particularly interested in that. One thing that, it seems a little bit too bad is that if this was an in-person meeting, we would see the sort of famous people skills of President Biden be put to the test to see how far he could get. Of course, he knows Xi Jinping from many years past, but I don't know if that's as easy to convey in virtual settings, but I'm sure he will try. And probably there will be at least more of that dynamic than the more contentious dynamic that we saw in Alaska and elsewhere.
Well, maybe he'll have to rely on some Zoom emojis and reactions, but, well, we'll have to see how this summit goes. And this is where we're going to end the interview today. That was Nathan Mabubi at the University of Pennsylvania and Brendan O'Connor at the University of Sydney. Thank you both so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
The South Korean government has supplied 142,000 litres of urea water solution to 70 gas stations in 12 cities and provinces, including Seoul, Jeju and Busan. The government had vowed to supply 1.8 million litres of the solution used to power diesel vehicles to around 100 gas stations nationwide. It says it will speed up production so the other gas stations can receive their supply as soon as possible. Placing emergency controls on the production and provisions of urea solution, the government has also started producing 2 million litres of the solution using 700 tonnes of urea held by private companies. A new report shows almost 400,000 people in South Korea owned financial assets last year worth more than 1 billion Korean won. That is some $847,000 US. The figure is up nearly 11% on year, making it the second biggest growth on record. The KB Financial Group Research Institute said Sunday that the increase was largely due to gains made on the stock market. Based on the findings, the number of people classified as wealthy now accounts for about 0.8% of the country's total population of 52 million. South Korea ranked top among 37 major economies when it comes to its household debt as a percentage of GDP. The Institute for International Finance says that as of the second quarter, South Korea's ratio hit 104.2%, Hong Kong second with 92%, and the UK third with around 89%. South Korea was also top in terms of the rate of increase in household debt. The Institute said that 1/3 of the major economies experienced a rise in household debt with soaring housing prices, but this was particularly noticeable in South Korea and Russia.
The number of people employed in South Korea's manufacturing sector hit an almost decade-long low for the month of October. It was mainly due to disruptions in the global supply chain affecting automobile production. According to Statistics Korea, around 4.3 million people were in work last month, more than 10,000 people less than the same month last year. Analysts are concerned about the employment situation, predicting disruptions in the global supply chain to last until early next year. Going green is in the spotlight more than ever right now, and the world of startups is no exception. DCamp, a Korean startup accelerator supported by banking institutions, hosted a festival dubbed Imagine Future 2021 in Seoul, where eco-friendly companies were the focus. Over the weekend at the Global League event, environmental, social, and governance startups from home and abroad showcased their business ideas to attract investment. They included upcycling waste coffee grounds and providing energy-saving solutions. The Beijing Stock Exchange begins trading Monday, becoming mainland China's third stock exchange, joining the Shenzhen and Shanghai indexes. 81 firms will be listed on the new exchange initially. The BSE is focused on financing innovative startups from small to mid-sized companies. Listed firms include those in the medicine, mechanical equipment, new materials, and IT sectors. The launch comes a matter of weeks after it was first announced in September by Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Experts say a dubbing strategy played a crucial role in making the South Korean Netflix show Squid Game more accessible and popular around the world. The Wall Street Journal reports that 60% more viewers watched dubbed versions rather than the subtitled version. Squid Game was dubbed in 34 different languages, including French, Portuguese, Hindu and even Chinese, even though Netflix is not available in China. The report noted that the number of users watching the dubbed versions of Netflix actually more than doubled compared to last year. The first big music concert since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic has taken place in South Korea as the country gradually returns to normal life. Hosted by South Korea's Culture Ministry and the Korean Foundation for International Cultural Exchange, the World K-pop Concert, BIT4U Concert, was held Sunday evening at the Korea International Exhibition Center in Goyang City. Around 3,000 people were allowed in free of charge, mostly underprivileged and multicultural families. K-pop stars, including NCT Dream, among others, performed along with American pop star Kehlani, who joined the show virtually. Now, Korean movies and TV shows like Parasite and Squid Game continued to attract a whole bunch of attention around the world. As a result of the ripple effect of this popularity, more Korean companies are looking to expand their reach overseas as well. Luckily for them, help is on hand in the form of the government-backed K-Expo. Our Kim Bok-young went to check it out and files this report.
A wide range of sectors representing South Korea have all gathered at the COEX Convention and Exhibition Center in Seoul from Monday until Thursday as part of the combined K-Expo and annual Hallyu Festival. The event is an effort to promote Korean businesses and content on a global scale. Cutting-edge technology from Korea, such as virtual reality and extended reality that can be used to dramatize online concerts, are among items being showcased. And of course, Korean cosmetics and Korean food are reaching a wider audience. Parasite-inspired hit food japaguri, a mix of Korean instant noodles and dried seaweed liver, is among in-demand products for export, perhaps helped by pictures of BTS characters on the packaging.
Though this product was only released in September, there's been a lot of demand from Japan and North America, so we are doing our best to meet that demand.
Through the event, Korean companies have sought export and investment opportunities. One game company has been engaged in online business discussions as they try to find the right partner to work with in the Indonesian market.
We are seeing each other for the first time online. Could you introduce your company?
According to the Korea Creative Content Agency, 66 domestic content companies have participated in expert consultation with 52 buyers from overseas. As demand for online business meeting rises, the agency has strengthened its online B2B platform.
Due to the pandemic, people cannot see each other. During these difficult times, we hope Hallyu can extend its boundaries by introducing Korean content online.
Though its offline event is over, the expo will run until the end of the month alongside the Hallyu Festival on the kexpo.kr website. Kim Bok-young, Arirang News.
South Korea has developed a program that uses AI to predict what kind of symptoms patients could develop over the next 2 years based on their current health status. Cho Sang-min has more.
Cardiovascular diseases such as heart attacks and stroke are one of the leading causes of death in South Korea. Because these illnesses tend to show up without any major red flags, regular checkups and preemptive measures are needed in order to prevent them. So South Korea has developed a type of AI-based software dubbed Dr. AI, which can predict the development of any acute symptoms 2 years in advance based on people's current health. Although collecting patient data is prohibited by law, the software can make predictions by using data from separate AI programs installed in hospitals.
Dr. AI uses various techniques seen in artificial intelligence programs at several general hospitals and displays over 90% accuracy in predicting a patient's future condition. It allows us to optimally diagnose and treat each patient.
The developers plan to boost the program's accuracy by further expanding cooperation with more medical institutions. They are also working on widening the program's capabilities so that it could be used for different illnesses such as cancer or diabetes.
We plan to commercialize the program by the end of next year, so the service is available to patients.
Experts believe Dr. AI will help treat and manage patients at small and medium-sized hospitals where data from clinical trials is lacking, as well as help improve contactless diagnosis systems in the post-pandemic era. 조성민, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. At least 68 prisoners were killed and more than 24 others injured as another prison riot broke out in Ecuador on Saturday. The deadly violence occurred at the Penitenciaria del Litoral, the same prison where 119 inmates were killed in September in what was the country's worst ever incident of prison violence. Just as with previous incidents, the latest event comes amid another clash between gangs inside the prison.
These events are due to a territory dispute by criminal gangs inside the prison. At the moment, there are certain pavilions that are without leaders. Because this may be surprising to all citizens, those leaders were released after having served 60% of their sentence.
Ecuador has seen a number of deadly incidents within its prisons, with 79 inmates killed in February and 22 in July. Ecuadorian President Guillermo Lasso in September declared a 60-day state of emergency in the prison system, freeing up government funding and allowing for military assistance to control prisons. At least one person is dead after 2 strong earthquakes struck southern Iran on Sunday. The quakes measured magnitudes of 6.3 and 6.4 as residents in Hormozgan province fled their homes.
I was busy with work when I suddenly saw the building was shaking very violently. First, we said this will end quickly, then we saw it took longer. It happened for 30 seconds.
Officials say the quake was felt in several cities in the province, as well as across the Gulf in Dubai. Despite the 2 earthquakes, no structural damage to homes in the area has been reported. The Chief Minister of New Delhi has ordered a week-long closure of all schools amid worsening pollution in the Indian capital.
For a week from Monday onwards, all the schools will be physically closed. Virtual classes will continue so that the children don't have to come out and breathe polluted air.
With no wind expected to blow throughout most of the week, the minister added that construction activities will also be shut down from Sunday to Wednesday. The air quality index on Sunday hit 470 on a scale of 500, marking levels of pollution in the air that will affect healthy people and seriously impact those with existing diseases. New Delhi is often ranked the world's most polluted capital, facing extremely bad air in winter due to crop stubble burning, emissions from transport, coal-fired plants outside the city, and other industrial emissions. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. There will be big gaps in ratings today. A chilly start turning into mild afternoon, resulting in huge gaps of more than 10 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. So we're going to need a winter jacket for the morning commute, but might feel too warm by the afternoon. Stagnant airflow will cause a boost in dust levels in central parts of the country, so have a face mask that helps to block fine dust today. Single-digit morning temperature temperatures to begin the day in most areas under sunny skies. Gyeongju starting out the day at just 3 degrees. Chuncheon colder at 2 degrees Celsius this morning. Then there will be a big rise in our highs today, going 3 to 4 degrees higher than seasonal norms. So Seoul will be going up to 15 degrees. Busan and Jeju will be at 19 degrees Celsius this afternoon. The weather looks more promising this week, but dryness in the air should continue. And this Thursday is the Suneung test, the college entrance exam day. And unlike most years, there will not be a sudden chill on that day. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. We'll be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Tuesday for our next edition of New Day at Arirang. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Kim Mo-gan.
Yes, thank you for joining us. We'll be here for the remainder of the week at the same time. I'll be back at 10 a.m. Korea time with our next newscast. Until then, goodbye.
What if new infectious diseases shatter our daily lives? What if we become targets of cyber attacks? What if we lose control over new technologies? Emerging security challenges are multiplying rapidly. Global crises are threatening our lives and safety.